We now come to arrangements for the election of the Chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee. As Neil Parish has ceased to be the member of this House, I must declare that the Chair of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee vacant and announce the arrangements for the election of the new Chair. Nominations are now open and will close at 12 noon on Tuesday the 24th of May. Nomination forms are available from the Vote Office, the Table Office and the Public Bill Office. Following the House's decision of the 16th of January 2020, only members of the Conservative Party may be candidates. If there is more than one candidate, the ballot will take place on Wednesday, the 25th of May, from 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. in the I Division lobby. Briefing notes with more information about each election will be made available in the Vote Office. We now come to the urgent question. Shadow Secretary of State, John Healey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Defence to make a statement on UK military assistance to Ukraine.
Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom strongly condemns the appalling, unprovoked attack President Putin has launched on the people of Ukraine. We continue to stand with Ukraine and continue to support its right to be a sovereign, independent and democratic nation. The United Kingdom and our allies and partners are responding decisively to provide military and humanitarian assistance. This includes weapons that help Ukraine's heroic efforts to defend itself. We have sent over 6,900 new anti-tank missiles, known as NLAWs, a further consignment of Javelin anti-tank missiles, 8 air defence systems, including Starstreak anti-air missiles, 1,360 anti-structure munitions and 4.5 tonnes of plastic explosives. Mr. Speaker, as Ukraine steadies itself for the next attack, the United Kingdom is stepping up efforts to help its defence. As we announced on 26 April, we will be sending 300 more missiles, anti-tank systems, innovative loitering munitions, armoured fighting vehicles and anti-ship systems to stop shelling from Russian ships. The United Kingdom has confirmed £1.3 billion of new funding for military operations and aid to Ukraine. This includes the £300 million the PM announced on the 3rd of May for electronic warfare equipment, a counter-battery radar system, GPS jamming equipment and thousands of night vision devices. The Ministry of Defence retains the Humanitarian Assistance Task Force at readiness, with the headquarters at 48 hours readiness and the remainder of the force at 5 days notice to move should their assistance be requested. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has pledged £220 million of humanitarian aid for Ukraine, including granting in kind to the Ukraine Armed Forces over 64,000 items of medical equipment from the MOD's own supplies. We are ensuring, Mr. Speaker, that the United Kingdom and our security interests are secured and supporting our many allies and partners, especially Ukraine.
John Healey.
The Secretary of State promised to keep the House updated on Ukraine. So I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, for your help in ensuring that he's done so today with this UQ, the 77th day of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And the United Kingdom is united in condemnation of Russia and in solidarity with Ukraine. And from the outset, the government has had our full Labour support for military assistance into Ukraine. We do so again today. Mr. Speaker, there was no mass mobilisation from President Putin on Monday, but we must now expect this conflict to be long and slow. And the UK now needs to shift from crisis management of the current conflict to delivering the medium-term military support that Ukraine will need for Putin's next offensive. And this means new NATO weapons instead of Soviet-era equipment. So can I ask the Minister, has the UK begun supplying NATO stocks to Ukrainian fighters? Will this include artillery, training to form new brigades and air defence systems? How many Ukrainians have so far been trained by the UK on new NATO standard weapons? And Mr. Speaker, more than 2 weeks ago, the Defence Secretary promised to place in the library an update of the total number of weapons supplied into Ukraine by the UK and Western allies. This is not yet there. When will that be done? And would he spell out now the UK's and NATO's objectives in supplying this military assistance to Ukraine? Is, for instance, the government considering with allies maritime support to help trading again in and out of the port of Odessa? Who is leading the government's new inquiry into UK components that end up in Russian weaponry? And is it still the case, 11 weeks into this conflict, that contracts have not been signed for new UK supplies of NLAWs and Star Street missiles, which have proved so vital in Ukraine? Finally, Mr. Speaker, the head of the British Army this week has said the Army is too small, despite Conservatives voting down Labour's motion in this House a year ago to halt further cuts. So will he accept there was a defence-shaped hole in the Queen's speech, and that the government must now rewrite the integrated review defence spending, reform military procurement, and rethink army cuts?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm very grateful to be here answering the Shadow Secretary of State's questions. He will know, I think, that the Secretary of State regrets not being here. He's in the United States continuing discussions with our closest NATO ally about our collective defence. And he looks forward, I think, to further opportunities to update this House in person. And I should put on record, Mr. Speaker, we continue to appreciate Labour support over all issues attendant to Ukraine. He rightly reflects, Mr. Speaker, on the fact that the invasion of Ukraine is now moving to the long and slow medium-term phase, one of a war of attrition in the East, which still, of course, occurs at great cost of human life to the Ukrainians and the Russian armed forces. We will continue discussions with our Ukrainian allies with regard to the weapon systems and support that is provided. But I think fundamentally and overwhelmingly, Mr. Speaker, what's hugely important is that we meet the requests that come from the Ukrainians themselves. This needs to be a provision made in accordance with what the Ukrainians themselves are asking for. But I think we are now at this stage where we are seeing over the coming years the wholesale institutional reinvigoration of the Ukrainian armed forces. And I think the United Kingdom will have a very central and very proud role at the centre of that institutional rejuvenation of the Ukrainian armed forces. And in fact, we have been proud, Mr. Speaker, to be building on our legacy of training involvement, which started in 2014 with the hugely successful Operation Orbital, which trained some 25,000 Ukrainian armed forces. So there's a good legacy of joint working, which we will continue to take forward. He asked about the update to the library, Mr. Speaker. I will ensure, following this urgent question, that is provided with all due haste. He asked about the objectives with regard to security and trade, and I think he was hinting about the requirement of the Ukrainians to be able to export their hugely significant grain harvest out of Odessa and other ports. Of course, that is those trade questions are matters for my right honourable colleague, the Trade Secretary. But I think the economic component of our support and our defensive relationship with Ukraine is not lost. This will be a whole package of support that allows Ukraine to flourish as a sovereign territory. This is not just about the reinvestment in Ukrainian armed forces, it's about the rejuvenation of their economy and also about the rebuilding of the physical infrastructure of much of the country, which has been so heinously destroyed since the commencement of the war on February 24th. He led then to make some comments about the size of the British Armed Forces. And I'm very happy to answer that very directly. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the £24 billion uplift in defence spending, we are in good shape and we are in good size. We've got what we need to deliver the effect we need. We are a threat-led organisation and we are agile, we're mobile and we're more lethal than ever before. And I think the integrated review, Mr. Speaker, was proven right by the invasion of Ukraine in the sense that we need a military that can project power around the globe, that can use loitering munitions, that can use drones and other forms of the delivery of munitions, which aren't so much about the close quarter fight. But I think the invasion of Ukraine does prove the integrated review right. We've got more money than we've had than ever before. We're in a good shape, but of course we keep all of these things under review, Mr. Speaker. And I would reiterate my expectation that the Secretary of State will be very pleased to have an opportunity in the near future to keep the House informed of the discussions that we have with our Ukrainian allies and our and the US in due course, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Andrew Merrison.
Putin's war has displayed the woeful inadequacy of the Russian military. However, one thing they have that we don't are hypersonic missiles, which they've used against Mykolaiv and now Odessa. Does he regard that as a gap in our defence material? And if he does, what measures is he taking to stop up that gap, perhaps with reference to the AUKUS treaty and the possibility of a joint programme with our two great allies?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my right honourable gallant friend makes a very good point. We have seen the woeful inadequacy of the Russian military. In fact, I don't know if he was able to listen to the Defence Secretary's speech at the National Army Museum earlier this week, which laid out the operational failings that, at all levels across the Russian army, which have so painfully resulted in such significant casualties. He makes an interesting point about hypersonic missiles. I won't speculate about future capabilities from the dispatch box, but I would say that a lot of this sort of work is done in my own constituency of Farnborough by the defence industry there, and he can rest assured that at the very heart of our defence proposition, contained in the IR, is energetic and significant investment in cutting-edge defensive technologies.
SNP spokesperson Dave Dugan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister mentioned in his speech 300 additional missiles. I wonder what you can tell us in terms of the capability we're extending to the Ukrainians in terms of anti-ship missiles in particular. He deflected the grain exports issues to his colleague, the Secretary of State for International Trade. Of course, we're not talking about treaties or grain prices. We're talking about the safety of ships in and out to Ukraine. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more seriously. On the 3rd of May, the UK government pledged an additional £300 million in military aid to Ukraine, with the Secretary of State advising the House that the government had given £200 million to date. Can you confirm that apparent £500 million figure? And it also emerged that the Secretary of State for Defence has warned the Chancellor of the Exchequer that the UK risks falling short of its NATO commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defence, and that could happen as soon as 2025. And he warned that this was due to the compound effect of inflation and supplying goods, armaments to Ukraine. Could the Minister mention that, and could he mention the Ministry's ambition to redouble minimising waste as a way of controlling that also? And what discussions has he had with our NATO and other international allies on the worry that Putin and his regime will resort to the use of chemical weapons and worse on civilian targets within Ukraine? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. He makes an interesting series of questions. I did refer to my additional remarks about the anti-ship systems, and I take that point on. And it's in public source that the brimstone capability has been deployed in that regard, and we regard that as a highly potent system. I think that will afford some security because, and he rightly makes the point that links into the ability of the Ukrainians to export their not inconsiderable grain supplies. And I would urge him to, I will engage with the Secretary of State for Trade, but I would say that that's firmly in our focus in terms of the matrix of military support we provide to the Ukrainians. I know that is the economic element of that, which of course is meeting the Ukrainians' own requests. We're not telling the Ukrainians what to do. It's their operation. But I know that the economic side of that, in terms of grain provision and security attendant to that, is something that we are seeking to support them over. He mentioned our commitment to NATO, the NATO standard of 2% in terms of our defence commitment, and of course that is being challenged by inflation. We keep that constantly under review, and I mean he's inviting me to comment or to lobby the Treasury from the dispatch box, which I will resist that temptation. But I think we can be reassured, Mr. Speaker, that our absolute commitment to putting our money where our mouth is in terms of defence investment and supporting our allies, whilst also maintaining our commitment to NATO, has been shown to be very considerable, and we've invested that £1.3 billion because of that, and we will keep that under review. He raised the question about whether or not President Putin might commit atrocities of a chemical nature. Again, I wouldn't speculate on what course of action the Russian president would choose, but what I would say is I think the resolve of the international community since the illegal invasion on February 24th has shown that he will be held to account and there will be no tolerance for any kind of chemical atrocity. We would hope, Mr. Speaker, that subsequent to this phase of operations, in due course and with our support, the Ukrainians will allow the collection of evidence of all Russian atrocities so that Putin and his cronies can be held to account in the International Criminal Court.
Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As Ukrainians retake their territory, there's an urgent need for kit to help repair roads and bridges. To get the equipment and troops to the front line. Are we able to supply any temporary bridges and other hardware to help in this important area?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. The rebuilding challenge that will have to be completed by our Ukrainian friends, supported by allies, will be hugely significant. It'll be an infrastructure rebuild of tens of millions of pounds, billions of dollars. And I would think that we will be supporting that effort from the government side, but also I'm sure there'll be many, many private sector opportunities there. And I think bridges will be one of the things that is involved in that infrastructure effort.
So Tony Lloyd.
Speaker, I wonder could the Minister comment on the following. We know that Russia has significant capacity in terms of cyber attack and cyber defence. Are we able to provide assistance to the Ukrainians so that they can defend themselves adequately against that kind of attack?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's an extremely pertinent question. The answer is yes. Of course, there are other centres of excellence around the world. The Estonians, for example, know a great deal about countering the Russian cyber threat. But he makes a very pertinent point. As we consider the collective Western response, we must understand and be aware of it, that it's not just about positioning large static forces of men and women in military units. It's also about ensuring that very, very robust cyber defence is afforded Ukraine and her allies at the same time.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Minister for his statement and thank him for the work that he's doing. We're very fortunate to have excellent ministers leading the Defence Department at this time. NATO continues to be the bedrock of our collective security, and I welcome the steps to deploy more troops to Eastern Europe. Does my honourable friend agree with me that we must step up cooperation with our friends in NATO, as well as other European allies? I note the Prime Minister is today in Finland and Sweden. I wonder if you'd agree with me that in the face of Russian aggression, it's vital that we support these European allies.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree entirely with that analysis, and that's why the Defence Secretary is in the US today with our hugely significant NATO ally. We have continued our work with the Joint Expeditionary Force, which is the amphibian beer-drinking nations of Northern Europe, and we are, of course, delighted that the Prime Minister will be going. And I think the position of Finland and Sweden, of course, they will choose their own path, and NATO is an alliance that waits for people to ask to become members. It doesn't go around proselytising. But I think the way we have worked closely with nations such as Finland and Sweden within the JEF and their possible interest in NATO shows the importance of and the resolve of the alliance of NATO. We are much stronger together, and that's why Russia is much weaker, because they have no allies and we have many, many friends.
Jarvis.
Decisions about military support to Ukraine are inevitably taken in the context of the state and the size of our armed forces. Now, I'm sure the Minister is a regular reader of Soldier magazine, so he will have seen the comments by CGS expressing concern about the size of the army. He's right, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, Mr. Speaker, we are a threat-led organisation. Because of the £24 billion uplift in defence spending, we are in good shape, and we are in good size, and we are more lethal, more mobile, and more agile than ever before. Of course, we keep the situation under review, but I think the invasion of Ukraine, in a nutshell, have proved the integrated review right.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My gallant friend, the Minister, will know that weapons and military equipment can only be used if troops are trained effectively to use them. So can he outline what avenues he's exploring to continue to provide the military training necessary so that Ukrainian troops can counter Russian attacks as they've so admirably been doing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend makes a very, very good point. Those discussions are ongoing. We will be guided by what the Ukrainians themselves want. But I think we are all encouraged by the legacy of close cooperation born out of Operation Orbital, which was running since 2014 and training some 25,000 Ukrainian troops. So I foresee a very bright future for very close operational and training working between ourselves and the magnificent and courageous Ukrainian armed forces.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I associate myself and my party with the strong support for Ukraine that's been expressed by the Minister and the Shadow Secretary of State? Last month, I raised with the Secretary of State the issue of the deadly legacy being left by retreating Russian forces in parts of Ukraine, namely lethal landmines. Can I press the Minister, what equipment has been sent to Ukraine at this stage, and will advice be offered along with that equipment, please?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman raising that issue. Those discussions are ongoing, and we will be guided by requests from our Ukrainian friends. But we do have a significant body of unique expertise in this country, primarily because of our two-decade involvement on operational soldiering in the Middle East. And some of the third sector organisations in this country, such as the Halo Trust and others, have, born of military experience often, have conducted hugely impressive demining operations in the Far East and the Middle East. So I do think this is a significant body of experience that we might be able to offer up to our Ukrainian friends. And I think the mines that have been used by Russian forces demonstrate, if anyone was in any doubt, of the casual disregard for civilian life that the Russians are so regrettably and so callously displaying in Ukraine.
Rob Butler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I strongly welcome the Minister's update on the UK's continued support for Ukraine with the supply of more weapons today. Can my honourable friend confirm that the type of equipment that we provide will evolve as circumstances demand, because this situation is developing, unfortunately, into a war of attrition? And can you further confirm that our commitment will continue for as long as it takes for Putin to fail as he must?
Well, he makes a very good point, Mr. Speaker, and of course, I can confirm that the provision of equipment will evolve. I regard all of the provision we have made as defensive, because this is an absolutely defensive war. It's a sovereign state defending their sovereign territory, and very courageously. I should also point out that alongside the kit, it's about the provision of training and doctrine. Now, of course, I think the Ukrainians are experts themselves in how to fight, but it's the training and it's the doctrine and it's the ability to join up your operations in all of the domains, which actually the Ukrainians have displayed with remarkable facility, that are important. So I foresee a long and significant defence relationship in terms of equipment, but also a very, very important defence relationship in terms of shared training, doctrine and mobilisation together with our Ukrainian friends.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says there's sufficiency within the armed forces. However, we're in peacekeeping operations and security operations. We're not in combat in Ukraine. And therefore, if there is an escalation of risk, whether in Ukraine or as a result of food shortage elsewhere around the globe, that's seriously going to challenge our capability, isn't it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have, I think we have an armed forces that are more mobile and deployable and agile than ever before, and that is what will meet the threats that we face. And I think that's really what the integrated review got right. Our support to Ukraine has been very, very small in terms of mass, but I think in terms of her question about the readiness or the capacity of our armed forces to be able to react to future threats globally, I think she should be reassured that thanks to the £24 billion uplift in defence spending, we are in good shape. We don't want large bodies of men and women sitting in barracks. We want them deployable, we want them ready, we want them lethal, and we want them agile.
Jameson.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Could I please ask the Minister about policy resilience? We've heard from his previous answer, about the fact that the level of support to Ukraine will continue. But can I ask him, please, for how long it will continue, particularly if the conflict goes from months into years, it becomes a attritional campaign? And also, is that view and stance shared by all of our other allies? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for my honourable friend's question. He pays close attention to these matters. And I think we have all been clear that our support to Ukraine is something that will, I expect, to last many years. We've had a very close defence relationship since 2014. I think we are moving to a phase of the campaign that is attritional and will be continued at tragic and significant cost to the Russian state. We can't speculate on how long it might last, but I think we must be prepared for it to last for a very, very long time. And I think we should be reassured by the fact that we and our allies across Western Europe have the resolve to see this through, because it's resolve, apart from kit and equipment, resolve is the key ingredient to a successful military campaign. We have all observed how the Russian armed forces are completely absent in terms of the moral element, and I would be reassured by the fact that throughout NATO and throughout our military and diplomatic alliances in Western Europe, that resolve is shared, and we are much stronger because we are part of an amazing alliance. And what's different from our position to that of Russia is that they have very few friends.
The humanitarian support that he mentioned includes how we welcome Ukrainian people who want a sanctuary from us. A constituent of mine is sponsoring a family of 5 people. The first visa was approved on the 13th of April. The 5th visa took until the 9th of May. Now, these delays are inexcusable and they are impossible to understand for those applying or for the public in this country. Will he raise again with his colleagues across government the importance of getting this right and offering that welcome in a timely and humanitarian way?
For his question, and I thank his constituents for sharing that compassion. The response of the British public has been absolutely magnificent in this regard. I will raise that with the relevant Home Office Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks about the agility of the British Army, but don't we also need to see some agility in the thinking of defence ministers? Because it's clear that the integrated review was written with a very different world in mind. It almost entirely overlooked the threat of war in Europe, and we've seen the danger in our history of being complacent. I'm worried that the hubris of ministers defending that integrated review will prevent them showing the agility to actually change now that the threats have changed. So will the minister just think again about the decision to cut 10,000 more of our troops that CGS is concerned about, and the decision on Challenger tanks, and really make sure we're able to deal with whatever threat faces us?
Well, Mr. Speaker, well, I contest his characterisation of the integrated review, and I mean, he will know from reading it that Russia as a threat is first and foremost containing in the analysis of the integrated review. So it was alive to threat on the European mainland. And of course we retain agility of thought across the ministerial team. We are a threat-led organisation. We will continue to keep our defence posture under review. But I would say, thanks to the £24 billion uplift, we are in good shape. We are in good shape.
Sir Mark Henry.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Minister, first of all, commend the Minister on the amount of humanitarian and military aid that are going to Ukraine. But can I ask the Minister what assessment he's made of the effectiveness and the capacity of the Ukrainians to be able to distribute that aid, humanitarian aid, effectively, and the ability of the Ukrainian army to be able to get that equipment into the theatre effectively and have the skills and the capacity to be able to use that equipment effectively?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's an interesting pair of questions, and actually, when it comes to the robustness and the organisational ability of both the Ukrainian armed forces and their humanitarian forces, we have been reassured and amazed at their resilience and the extent to which they have maintained their integrity and their operational capability. So we should be confident that all support we provide, whether it be defensive, lethal aid or indeed humanitarian aid, is reaching its required destination.
Margaret Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UN have said that the Ukrainian death toll is likely to be much higher than the 3,381 so far confirmed. What support is the UK offering in helping Ukraine retrieve and count their dead and help to ensure families are informed where possible?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will, of course, afford all help that we can following requests from Ukraine. And I think we should put on record that we are expectant that the Ukrainians will do, with our support if required, a very thorough job of gathering all relevant evidence of Russian atrocities, especially against innocent civilians, women and children, in order that Putin and his cronies are held to account very firmly and in good order in front of the International Criminal Court.
Jim Shah. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the last weekend and Saturday through until yesterday morning, I had the opportunity to be in Poland to see some of the things that the Polish nation were doing for Ukrainian refugees. For the record, Mr. Speaker, it's good whenever you speak to foreign ministers there, they tell us that the people of the United Kingdom and the government have been exceptionally helpful. So I want to put that on the record, since that came straight from the ministerial department. Can I ask the Minister this question? In light of US intelligence suggesting that Putin is betting in for the long haul, will the Minister make clear that our military aid, including the anti-tank missiles from Belfast and my constituency of Strangford, and that supplies will also be available for the long haul, along with the humanitarian aid, which is very important for the victims of Putin's oppression, aggression and violence?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I absolutely can give him that reassurance, and I'm grateful for the question. I think what's unique about the nation supporting Ukraine is their collective resolve and our absolute firm determination to see this through for the long term, however many years that may be.
That ends that urgent question. But before we come to the second urgent question, I'd like to point out to the House that the scope of the question is narrow, focusing on one particular case. Therefore, I'm not expecting members to raise broader, unrelated issues. I expect proceedings on this question to last roughly around 20 minutes. I hope members will bear this in mind when considering whether to seek to catch my eye. I now call Vera Hobhouse.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs if she will make a statement on Jim Fitton.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for raising this important case. And I recognise this is a very distressing time for Mr. Fitton and his family. I would also like to reassure honourable members that the consular officials continue to maintain contact with Mr. Fitton and his family. Indeed, they met with his family this morning, and we liaise with his lawyers to provide consular assistance. Since his arrest in March, consular officials have visited Mr. Fitton on 4 occasions. And we understand the urgency and concerns that Mr. Fitton and his family have. We cannot, of course, interfere or seek to interfere with the judicial process of another country, just as we would not expect interference in our own judicial process. That said, The British ambassador in Baghdad has raised and will continue to raise Mr. Fitton's case with the Iraqi government, and this includes raising with the authorities the UK's very strong opposition to the death penalty, both in terms of its potential application to Mr. Fitton and also our in principle opposition to the death penalty in all instances.
Where Hobart?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. May I say that I'm deeply concerned by the Foreign Office's engagement with my constituent's case. Jim is 66-year-old, he's a geologist, he's sitting in a cell in Iraq, he has missed his daughter's wedding, and he potentially faces a death penalty. His family are worried sick. Nearly 250,000 people have signed a petition urging the government to help Jim. Jim's lawyer believes that representations from the British government could make a huge difference in this case, but I'm afraid the government gives the impression that they're not particularly interested or worried. Ministerial engagement has been slow. It took 10 days for the Minister's private office to inform me that a meeting with Jim's family was not on the cards. Jim is now days away from a trial. We are told that the government won't be making the crucial representation to the Iraqi government. It is my understanding that the German government are making representations on behalf of one of their constituents detained with Jim. Why won't the Foreign Office do the same? So I hope the Minister will be able to answer these key questions. Jim's trial is fast approaching. Will the Minister meet with me and Jim's family before the trial and before it is too late? Will he commit to making representations to her Iraqi counterpart, as the German authorities are doing? Mr. Speaker, there are implications far beyond Jim's case. It fits into a concerning pattern of the UK government failing to do enough for its citizens abroad. Can the Minister clarify his view of the role of the Foreign Office in supporting British citizens that run afoul of legal injustices and draconian laws abroad, such as in Jim's case? Will he commit to a root and branch review of how the Foreign Office responds to situations like this? Mr. Speaker, British citizens deserve the help of the British government. Jim Fitton is potentially facing the death penalty. I urge the Minister to do everything they can do to stop this nightmare before it turns into a tragedy.
Mr. Speaker, I completely reject the Honourable Lady's assertions about the role of the British government in this case and other consular cases. Let me remind the House, and with your indulgence, Mr. Speaker, I do think it's worth going into this in detail. On the 23rd of March, shortly after his arrest, consular officials visited Mr. Fitton in detention. On the 4th of April, consular officials visited him again. On the 10th of April, the British ambassador raised his case with the Iraqi authorities. On the 25th of April, consular officials visited Mr. Fitton in detention again. On the 1st of May, the British Embassy sent a note verbale to the Iraqi government on Mr. Fitton's case. On the 1st of May, the British ambassador again raised the issue of Mr. Fitton's case with the Iraqi government. On the 8th of May, the British ambassador to Iraq again raised Mr. Fitton's case with the Iraqi government. On the 8th of May, consular officials visited Mr. Fitton in detention. On the 10th of May, the British ambassador to Iraq again raised Mr. Fitton's case with the Iraqi officials. On the 11th of May, just today, as I said, the family met with our expert consular officials on the FCDO. We do these things not because these cases are raised in the House. We do these things because they are the right thing to do. I am proud of the work that our officials do both in Iraq and the consular team here in the UK to support individuals and the families of those individuals who have been arrested. We will, of course, continue to raise this case with the Iraqi officials, and we will, of course, continue to liaise with Mr. Fitton and his family, and we will continue to support British nationals in incarceration around the globe.
Right.
Speaker, Mr. Fitton is not my constituent, but a large number of his family and friends live in the village of Box just outside Bath. First of all, I would two caveats. First, I entirely accept your injunction that this is not a matter for the Minister's injunction, rather, this is not a matter for the British government. It must come under the Iraqi judicial system, and that's perfectly correct. And secondly, that ancient relics are of extreme importance to the Iraqi government, particularly post-Saddam Hussein. However, with this background, I also incidentally reject much of what the Honourable Lady Bath had to say about the consular service in general, which in my experience is absolutely outstandingly good and quite wrong to attack it in general because of this particular case. Having said which, we have here an elderly, well, a little bit younger than me, but nonetheless an elderly scientist who inadvertently picked up a couple of shards in Iraq, a very, very minor offence in our terms, albeit an important one with regard to Iraq. And he's facing potentially very long prison sentences or even possibly the death sentence. So I want to hear from the Minister that he absolutely commits himself to doing whatever we can through the consular service, particularly providing English-speaking lawyers and English-speaking support of one kind or another to try and either get him off or secondly at least to mitigate the sentence that he will have to face.
I thank the honourable gentleman's kind remarks about the professionalism of the Foreign Office's consular team. They deal with incredibly difficult and sensitive issues regularly. I can assure him that we will continue to work tirelessly to bring this case to the attention of our opposite numbers in the Iraqi government. As I say, it would be wrong for us to attempt to distort their legal process, but we will, of course, help Mr Fitton's family secure legal representation, including English-speaking legal representation, to give him the proper ability to defend himself in this instance.
Now comes Shadow Minister Bambos or Lambos.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Bath, for securing this urgent question today and for her tireless advocacy on behalf of her constituent, Jim Fitton. My thoughts are with Mr Fitton and his family, and I'd like to echo the concerns raised by colleagues across the House. In March, Mr Fitton, a British citizen and retired geologist, was arrested in Iraq on a charge that carries the death penalty, and he remains detained. As we've heard, he was part of a tour group visiting Iraq on an organised geology and archaeology trip during the tour. The group picked up some broken fragments of stone and pottery from the ground. The fragments were out in the open, unprotected, and without nearby signage warning against their removal. Members of the tour were told they could take the fragments home as a souvenir, as they held no economic or historical value. And as a retired geologist, Mr Fitton's family have made clear he would never in any way intend to disrespect or appropriate the rich and fascinating culture of the region, but rather to celebrate it. However, he awaits a trial date for sentencing, which is expected imminently, and the window for intervention from the Foreign Office is therefore narrowing. Urgent government action is needed, and the lack of engagement from the ministers is creating frustration from everyone who wishes to see this situation resolved. And the Foreign Office needs to do everything it can to protect British citizens wrongfully being detained abroad, and I hear what the Minister has said about the consular support that's been provided already. But I'd like to ask the Minister what efforts the FCDO is taking urgently on behalf of Mr Fitton in securing high-level meeting with judicial officials in Iraq, and this is in relation to legal representation, to resolve this case, and also in engaging with Mr Fitton's family. And does he also share my concern that by dragging its feet on cases such as this, the public trust in the government's commitment to protecting British citizens wrongfully detained abroad is profoundly impacted? Mr Speaker, as each day passes, this case becomes more serious, and I urge the government to take the necessary steps to allow Jim to be reunited with his family before it's too late. Thank you.
Mr Speaker, the FCDO visited Mr Fitton in detention on the 23rd of March. He was arrested on the 21st of March. The honourable gentleman, who knows I have a huge amount of respect for him, is frankly talking nonsense when he talks about dragging our feet. We visited Mr Fitton in detention within days of his arrest. We have visited him 3 times since that. We have had, as I said, on more than weekly occasions, interacted from the ambassador to the Iraqi government on this issue. I completely reject the assertion that he's made about the British government's engagement on this issue. We are deeply engaged with this issue. We will remain deeply engaged with this issue. As I said, it would be completely inappropriate for us to seek to distort the Iraqi legal process, but we will continue to support Mr Fitton in his legal case, in the defence of the case against him, and we will continue to support his family through what we completely understand is a deeply distressing time.
Andrew Morrison, Dr. Andrew Morrison.
I congratulate the Honourable Lady, the Member for Bath and my near neighbour, on raising the case of her constituent. Accepting that government can't interfere directly in matters of this sort, will he understand that the mechanics of the criminal justice systems of other jurisdictions isn't necessarily the same as we would expect in the United Kingdom? And will he contrast the approach to this problem by the UK government with that of Germany, which appears at ministerial level to be far more involved?
Mr. Speaker, having previously held the brief for the Middle East and North Africa, I can assure him, and indeed as a predecessor in that role, he will know that the UK enjoys a very close and strong relationship with the Iraqi government at both ministerial and official level. I completely understand the point that he makes about different judicial systems being dissimilar to our own, but we have to respect the judicial system in the countries that operate. We completely understand the concern that Mr. Fitton and his family have around this, and we will continue to engage as intensively as we have done already to ensure that the trial he receives is fair, that he has good legal representation, and that, and as I say, we do these things not because of questions in the House. We do these things because we believe it is absolutely the right thing for the UK government to do to support British nationals overseas.
SNP spokesperson, Chris Law.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the reason it's been brought to this, and I welcome this question being brought by the Honourable Member for Bath to this House, is because precisely action on the ground isn't happening, albeit the reassurances we're already having. Mr. Speaker, this is an unimaginably anxious and distressing time for Jim Fitton and his family, and I'd like to send a message of support to all of them on behalf of the SNP today. Sadly, we know the SCDO do not have the strongest track record on ensuring the safe and swift release of UK nationals from foreign detention. The SCDO must intervene now using every diplomatic avenue to prevent Iraqi authorities from sentencing Mr. Fitton to death. It is wholly disproportionate that Mr. Fitton potentially faces the death penalty for the removal of protected fragments and artefacts, and his family have stated that SCDO ministers are yet to lobby their Iraqi counterparts against issuing a death sentence. First of all, is this true? And if so, why is urgent action not being taken to safeguard a UK national? And finally, what's the FC doing to urgently secure Mr. Fitton's release?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not just going to simply say I refer the honourable gentleman to the answers I've given, but I do think that when I have listed the intensive level of engagement that we have had at the most senior levels within the British Embassy in Iraq, directly with the Iraqi government, including the issue of a note verbal, that for members of this House to say that the UK government has not been engaged in this is a complete perversion of the situation. We completely understand both Mr. Fitton and his family's concern around the situation here. We absolutely will continue to support him and them through this incredibly difficult time, and we will continue to engage with the Iraqi government to ensure the right outcome for Mr. Fitton, as I say, but we cannot, we should not, and we would not accept it happening to us that we seek to distort their legal system.
Neil Hanby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to first of all pay tribute and thank the Right Honourable Lady, or the Honourable Lady from Bath, for her work on this case, and I want to express my support and solidarity to Jim Fitton's family. Nothing can be more important than a function of consular services and to support those facing injustice abroad. Jim Fitton's sister, Ruth, approached me over the May Bank holiday. She's my constituent, and she set out the situation that the family and Jim are currently experiencing. I wrote immediately to the Foreign Secretary that afternoon, twice actually. I have yet to receive a response, so I would gently suggest to the Minister that his claims of urgency on this matter are certainly not reflected in the response or lack of that I have experienced in raising this case. Now, I wrote to the Foreign Secretary to implore her to take action. I have had no response, even though I made it very clear that we were in a perilous situation and that the trial date could be set for this week. It's now understood to be the 15th of May. I want to pick up on a particular point. I support all of the questions that have been raised by members across the House so far, but surely advocacy for a British citizen is not interference in a legal system. And the family's lawyers, they're responsible for the legal case. All they're asking the FCDO to do is to endorse that case. And what I would like to know is, will the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office please give us a single point of contact, somebody that we can liaise with and the family can liaise with, so that we are kept up to date on what's happening?
Mr. Speaker, the family have a point of contact within the consular system. The honourable gentleman says he wrote to the Foreign Secretary in May. Prior to his correspondence, we had already visited Mr. Fitton in detention 3 times. We had raised his case with the Iraqi authorities and we had issued a note verbal.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Minister for his response, but can the Minister further outline what steps have been taken to assess the adequacy of food, exercise and light that Mr. Fitton has access to, and what steps are the United Kingdom government taking, if possible, with the Iraq government to secure his release back to the United Kingdom under some system where he can then access his family? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman raises a valid point. Part of our regular visits with Mr. Fitton is to ensure that his circumstances remain humane and appropriate. We give advice with regards to the remand system, what privileges he might expect, social and welfare services, and we also, of course, seek to ensure that he gets proper English language representation. These are the things that we will continue to do to support him through what, as a number of honourable and right honourable members have already mentioned, has not yet gone to trial.
Margaret Farrier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for coming to the Chamber today to respond to this UK and ask him what constructive action can the government take to put pressure on Iraq to secure Jim's safe release and, at the very least, to have the abhorrent threat of the death penalty taken off the table immediately.
Mr. Speaker, as I say, in all our interactions with not just Iraq, but in all countries that have the death penalty, we ensure, when we speak of this issue, we highlight the fact that we have an in-principle opposition to the death penalty. We will, of course, continue to make it clear to the Iraqis that we oppose the imposition of the death penalty, both in Mr. Fitton's case and more generally. With regards to support to his legal team, ultimately it would not be appropriate for the UK government to take on a quasi role as legal representatives, but we will of course ensure that Mr. Fitton does have appropriate and a professional legal representation in a language that he can understand.
Leila Moran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I congratulate my honourable friend from Bath for raising this. Mr. Speaker, there's a difference between consular support and ministerial support. And my question to the Minister is, what's the point in all these visits if then when there are opportunities to actually do something useful, it doesn't get done? So, for example, Jim's lawyer referred the case to the Court of Secession. Doing so would have, in effect, thrown the case out. That moment, a supportive letter from the Minister would have made all the difference. Absolutely. And yet that did not happen. Yep. Why?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady is fundamentally wrong in her assertion. Our consular staff are the experts in this field. It is absolutely right that whether it be the ambassadorial team in Baghdad or indeed the consular team here in the UK, that we apply the technical experts to problems such as this. That is exactly what we have done.
Jonathan Edwards.
He mentioned in an earlier answer that there was a direct line for the family to contact officials. Can you confirm that that actually is an open line for the family to contact whenever they seek reassurance, as opposed to a line of reporting back on the government's actions?
Mr. Speaker, our consular team, as I've highlighted, are in regular contact with the family. Had a meeting with them just today. I have no doubt that our team will continue to work with them. We recognise just how concerning, how fearful they will be because of these circumstances. Our consular team are expert in dealing with families in circumstances like this, and I have no doubt they will continue to liaise closely with Mr Fitton's family.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Fitton is clearly not my constituent, but his former colleague Mark Smith is, and Mr Smith is bereft at the plight of his former colleague. Can I ask the Minister to impress upon Iraqi authorities that Mr Fitton is far from some profiteering treasure hunter. He is instead a deeply respectful and accredited academic who would never disrespect Iraq or its artefacts. And can the Minister confirm that the government will use all channels to try and impress upon the Iraqi authorities the most expedient and increased leniency in this case?
Mr Speaker, I can assure the honourable gentleman that the UK government are, at every level, always seek to take the actions that we believe will best benefit British nationals overseas. I can assure him that the level of engagement that I have outlined already in my answers will set the pattern for our continued engagement. We will, of course, seek to ensure that the legal process is conducted absolutely properly, and that we support Mr Fitton through our consular services and his family throughout this